It was a crisp fall afternoon in Jefferson Park, the kind of day that made you want to sit on a bench and lose yourself in the golden glow of the leaves. Families played by the fountain, joggers moved along the winding paths, and the occasional breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. Amara Daniels sat quietly near the pond, her favorite spot in the park. She loved the stillness of the water and the way the ducks paddled without a care in the world. Clad in simple workout clothes, leggings and a navy hoodie, she looked like any other woman enjoying the peacefulness of the day. Her life was anything but ordinary, though. Amara was an officer in the CIA, specializing in counterintelligence. Her work demanded long hours, high stakes, and incredible focus. But here in the park, she was just Amara, a woman who needed a moment to breathe. She was jotting something in her notebook when she noticed a shadow falling over her. Looking up, she saw two police officers standing nearby, their expressions stern and guarded. "Ma'am," one of them said, his hand resting on his holster. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. Can we ask what you're doing here?" Amara blinked, momentarily thrown off by the abrupt question. "I'm sitting," she said simply, holding up her notebook. "Writing." The second officer, taller and older, gave her a once-over. "Can we see some ID?" Amara frowned. "I don't understand. Why are you asking me for ID? I'm just sitting in the park like everyone else." "Just a routine check," the younger officer said, though his tone lacked warmth. Amara felt the weight of their stares. She wasn't naive. She knew what this was. She'd seen it happen to others, and now it was her turn. "Is this routine for everyone, or just people who look like me?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. The older officer's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, this isn't about race. We're just doing our job. Now, if you could hand over your ID, we'll be on our way." Amara sighed, setting down her notebook. "I'd like to know what exactly I've done that's suspicious." "You've been sitting here for a while," the younger officer said, taking notes. "That's not typical behavior." She let out a dry laugh. "So sitting and writing in a public park is a crime now?" The officers exchanged a glance, their patience clearly thinning. The older one took a step closer. "We're not here to argue, ma'am. If you refuse to cooperate, we'll have to take further action." Amara's heart pounded, but she kept her expression neutral. Years of training had taught her to stay composed under pressure. She could feel the eyes of nearby park-goers on her, their murmurs like a low hum in the background. "I've done nothing wrong," she said evenly. "I'm not giving you my ID without a valid reason." The younger officer's hand moved to his radio. "We might need backup," he muttered. Amara's jaw tightened. She could see where this was headed, and she wasn't about to let it spiral out of control. "All right," she said, reaching into her bag. "If you insist on knowing who I am." The officers tensed as Amara slowly pulled out a black leather wallet. She flipped it open, revealing her CIA badge and ID card. Both men froze, their faces shifting from authority to uncertainty. The younger officer blinked, his hand dropping from his radio. "You're CIA?" "That's right," Amara said, her tone sharp. "Officer Amara Daniels, Counterintelligence. And now I'd like to ask you two a question. What made you think I was a threat?" The older officer opened his mouth, but no words came out. The younger one stammered. We didn't know." "No, you didn't," Amara cut in. "You assumed. You saw a black woman sitting alone, minding her own business, and decided she didn't belong." By now, a small crowd had gathered, their phones out and recording. A middle-aged man stepped forward. "I've been sitting here for over an hour, too," he said. "Are you going to ask for my ID next?" The officers glanced at the man, then back at Amara. Their confidence was unraveling fast. "I'm sure you've got plenty of actual crimes to deal with," Amara continued. "So why don't you do your jobs and stop harassing innocent people?" The older officer cleared his throat. "We, apologize for the misunderstanding, ma'am." Amara raised an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding? Let's call it what it is: profiling. The crowd murmured in agreement, their disapproval evident. The officers muttered more apologies before hastily walking away, their shoulders hunched under the weight of their embarrassment. Amara watched them go, her emotions a mix of anger and exhaustion. She turned to the crowd, her voice steady. "Thank you for standing by me. This happens far too often, and it needs to stop." A young woman stepped forward, her phone still in hand. "I'm posting this. People need to see it." Amara nodded. "Do what you need to do. The more people know, the harder it is to ignore." That evening, the incident spread like wildfire. Videos of the encounter flooded social media, shared by witnesses who had been in the park. The hashtags #Justice for Amara and Stop Profiling began trending within hours, sparking heated conversations online. People from all walks of life weighed in, some expressing outrage, others sharing their own experiences of racial profiling. The clips of Amara calmly revealing her CIA badge, followed by the stunned reactions of the officers, became the focal point of the discussion. News outlets picked up the story the next morning, headlining it as another example of systemic bias. But this time, it came with a twist. The person targeted was a highly trained intelligence officer, someone who had devoted her life to protecting her country. Amara's name and face were soon everywhere. While she valued her privacy, she understood the weight of what had happened. This wasn't just about her. It was about the countless others who faced similar injustices every day but didn't have a badge or a title to shield them. Messages of support poured in. Strangers sent her emails thanking her for standing her ground. Community leaders reached out, inviting her to speak at events addressing racial equity and justice reform. Even high-ranking officials within the CIA privately reached out, expressing both pride in how she handled herself and embarrassment over the situation's public fallout. Amara felt the pressure of the spotlight, but she refused to let it weigh her down. Instead, she channeled it into something meaningful. She collaborated with civil rights organizations to raise awareness about profiling and trained law enforcement agencies on implicit bias. Her role as a CIA officer had always been about serving her country, but now she saw a new path, advocating for change from within the system. The following week, Amara returned to the park. It was a sunny afternoon, and the golden light filtered through the trees, casting long, gentle shadows across the ground. She walked along the familiar path, carrying her notebook and a small thermos of tea. As she approached the pond, people turned to look at her, not with suspicion, but with recognition and respect. A jogger slowed as he passed her, nodding politely. A group of teenagers sitting on the grass waved shyly. One of them called out, "You're amazing! Thank you for what you're doing." Amara smiled and waved back. Her heart felt lighter knowing her experience had sparked something larger than herself. She found her usual bench by the water, sat down, and opened her notebook. The ducks glided across the surface of the pond, undisturbed by the world's chaos, and for the first time in days, Amara felt a sense of calm settle over her. As she wrote, she reflected on the journey ahead. There was still so much work to do, so many voices that needed to be heard. But Amara was ready. She wasn't just a CIA officer or a black woman. She was a symbol of resilience and a force for change. This time, as she sat by the pond, the park felt different. It felt like her space, too, a space she didn't have to defend. No one dared to interrupt her peace, not because of her badge, but because of the strength she carried within her.